Welcome to the webinar, 10 Steps to Develop a Data-Literate Workforce. Sense Corp has been around for over 2 decades, offering a variety of consulting services across data, digital, and business transformation. Our team of skilled consultants offers insights and solutions to the most important problems facing business and government. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker, Alyssa Schneider. Alyssa is the data governance practice leader here at Sense Corp and has over 15 years of experience leading complex data transformation projects for Fortune 500 to mid-sized companies. All right, thanks for joining us, and we are going to go ahead and get started. Alyssa, I'm going to pass it to you.
Thank you, Kelly, for the introduction. As she said, my name is Alyssa Schneider, and I lead our data governance practice area. And so I spend a lot of my time teaching and educating the American workforce on why data governance matters and why it's so important in our day and age. Today, I have the pleasure of sharing on a closely related topic, which is data literacy, and something that is rising in importance in our world today. Now, having been in data for the last 15 years, I've worked in both technical and functional roles, as well as managerial roles. I've worked in numerous industries in both the private and public sectors, and I've seen and experienced firsthand what organizations are challenged with when data literacy is poor. You can see that I'm married and I'm a mom to 3 great kids, and I think that's important for you to know because I look at this topic of data literacy through a generational lens. What are we doing in our educational systems and our organizations today that is going to either create or diminish opportunities for our children in the future? So as we get started here today, we'll begin with gaining clarity on what data literacy is and why it's important. In the middle of this, I have a couple survey questions that I'd love for you to take part in, and then we'll get into the meat of why we're here today to learn about the 10 steps we can do to develop and foster a data literate workforce. And at the end, there'll be some time for questions, so please plan to participate if you have questions on any of the content that's presented here today. Data literacy. So why did Sense Corp want to bring this topic to your attention today? Well, companies with a high level of data literacy are disrupting industries. They're fundamentally changing customer expectations and service levels. Let's begin with a definition of data literacy. What is it? Well, quite simply, data literacy is the ability to read, work with, analyze, and ultimately argue with data. Much like literacy as a general concept, data literacy focuses on the competencies involved in working with data. And what do I mean when I say that exactly? So for most, learning to speak data is a lot like learning a new language. And I know it's likely that many of us in the audience today had to study a foreign language at some point in time, right? Perhaps several years in high school or a few semesters in college. And unless you grew up in a household where one or both of your parents spoke a second language, you experienced how difficult it can be to fully grasp a language and why collegiate immersion programs are so necessary. So when learning a new language, you have to learn to read it, to write it, and to speak it in order to begin formulating thoughts and sharing your thinking. And the learning process that you go through is not linear, right? The threads of reading, writing, and speaking, they often intertwine and build together to create fluency. And it's at this point that you will finally be able to participate in discussions, pick up nuances in conversations, and debate points of view. Just a few weeks ago, I was in a conversation with some colleagues where we were discussing the challenges that many of our non-native English-speaking colleagues have. Now, these folks speak English very well, but we were specifically focusing in on the nuances of the English language and how idioms that we all take for granted are not easy to learn or understand. And this is one reason why that children's book series, Amelia Bedelia, has been so popular since it was introduced in 1963. I can remember a page in her book where her employer asked her to dress the chicken. And she literally dressed the chicken in human clothing. Now, this is a funny example, but it underscores how complex literacy can be, but also why fluency is so important. It ensures that when we speak to one another, that what we imagine in our minds is clearly communicated in such a way that the other person also understands it in exactly the same way. So what does fluency look like in regards to data? Well, when we learn to read data, we utilize building blocks to develop a foundation of data, and that typically enables us to ask basic questions regarding the quality of our data. So in this phase, an organization may have started to put some building blocks in place to allow for a foundation of data, right? And examples may include the start of a business glossary or a data quality program. Now, when we learn to write data, we are doing activities like conducting data analysis, presenting with data, and telling the story of our business using data. At this phase, the organization is actively pursuing ways to move up the maturity curve. There's likely more evidence of enterprise-wide data governance, and the average business user is able to present and tell stories with data in a way that they could not do previously. Now, when we speak data, it's only then that we can get to the strategic things like evaluating our data ethics, making decisions with data, and tracking our progress with data. Every employee then recognizes that they are a data citizen and that the organization's data is a key asset worthy of curating and managing well. And at this phase, we often see organizations investing in leading edge technologies such as artificial intelligence and machine learning, and they've moved their decision-making capabilities from gut instincts to data-supported decisions. Now, with our world kind of thrown into chaos right now due to COVID-19, we're struggling with data literacy and data governance. And how do I know that? Well, let's take a quick look at some news headlines that surfaced back in May. The Atlantic put out an article titled, "How could the CDC make that mistake?" And they were referring to the CDC combining the reporting of viral tests and antibody tests into a single metric. These two things are not the same. Viral tests tell us where the virus is spreading, while antibody tests tell us where it's already been. The New York Times and NPR also reported on this story. And this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to data-related woes and COVID-19. There are new stories every week related to data challenges of some sort. Now, from a governance perspective, I can tell you that unfortunately, it doesn't surprise me. I've spent the last decade advising organizations that struggle with ensuring data quality from the point of capture and then ensuring cleanliness and fidelity as data travels through subsequent systems. But from a data literacy perspective, what's interesting to me is that these two tests were combined at all. It's quite possible that a lack of data literacy may have played a role in this. It may have kept someone from asking a simple question or identifying a data-related problem early on. Now, I don't know what caused this particular issue to occur, but I do believe that an increased level of data literacy could have prevented it in the first place. Now, let's zoom out for a moment. And instead of thinking just about the season we're in with COVID-19, let's explore data literacy through a bigger lens, how literacy has impacted human history throughout time. Throughout history, literacy has been a key component to the success of individuals, organizations, countries, and civilizations all over the world. But it has involved more than simply native languages. So when we say literacy, it's not just language. During the reign of the pharaohs in Egypt, for example, priests held significant power and wealth because they could interpret patterns that would help them predict natural events. We refer to this as nature proficiency or literacy. And as the Roman and Greek civilizations rose, power resided with the ancient philosophers who explained the physical world around them using moral and psychological questions. And they were proficient and literate in philosophy. And this pattern continued for centuries, leading to religious proficiency and expanded when the invention of the printing press in the 15th century helped spur the Reformation movement that brought literacy and basic education to the wider population and ultimately fed 3 industrial revolutions over the following centuries. We're now in a 4th industrial revolution, where concepts such as big data analytics and AI are driving exponential changes throughout society. And the data literate will lead by leveraging data-driven technologies. And so with this in mind, organizations are now beginning to recognize the sizable gap that exists in data literacy. where workers lack the ability to effectively interpret, understand, and utilize data to achieve optimized business results. And what do we know about data literacy today? Well, I want to share some statistics with you to give you context for just how big a hill this is to climb. Now, we have 6 percentages on this slide. The first 3 are relatively low, and the second 3 are relatively high. Let's go through them together and really explore where we are today with data literacy. 24%. This is the percentage of business decision makers that are fully confident in their ability to read, work with, analyze, and argue with data. That's awesome, but it means that nearly 3/4 are not. Now, 32%. This is the percentage of the C-suite that is viewed as data literate. Now, why is this important? Well, if you happen to be a director with a great idea about how to use data at your company, you may not be able to get the support you need in the C-suite to move that idea forward because the folks sitting there today may not be literate enough to fully grasp what that proposal is. 21%. This refers to the next generation, those aged 16 to 24 today. This age group has grown up with completely digital childhoods, devices since they were toddlers, and even they are not data literate. This underscores that data is a skill that has to be taught, just like anything in life. Just because you had a parent that cooked delicious food for you your entire childhood doesn't mean that you'll somehow become an amazing chef when you're 18 years old. 85%. The more data literate an employee is, the higher they rate themselves when it comes to their job performance, which means that organizations that nurture data literacy have a higher performing workforce and thus can compete more effectively for an industry advantage. 94%. Wow, this percentage is astonishingly high. Nearly everyone surveyed believed that using data helps them to do their jobs better. And 4 out of 5 people believe that it helps them establish credibility in their workplace. 78%. This is the percentage of people that are willing to invest more time and energy into improving their data skill sets. And that's amazing. That means without doing anything at all, 4 out of 5 people would willingly participate in data literacy programs. The impact of data literate organizations is heightened when we examine the so-called internet companies. Now, these are the companies that were generally formed sometime over the last 2 decades, and they're built on a strong foundation of data. Every transaction, interaction, connection is tracked, evaluated, and it's used for making decisions. Products and services are developed leveraging the data and the supporting algorithms. So companies like Google, Netflix, Uber, Grubhub, Wayfair, and others, they've been using data to establish their business models and disrupt established players in the marketplace. And these companies, they have 3 distinct advantages over established companies. The first is related to high quality data collection. These young internet companies, when they look at a business problem, they look at the process and the interaction and they evaluate it through a "can I track this" lens, which is quickly then followed with a "how can I scale this" discussion. Now, our established businesses, they often have legacy processes with limited and disparate data collection, right? They may still have mainframes in the mix, and there's typically very limited options for them to ensure high data quality from the point of entry. And so let's see about the second one now. The second advantage that these internet companies have is that they have a strong data literate workforce. So for these younger companies, knowing how to work with data is typically the minimum height to ride at a data literate company, right? So they hire strong data practitioners, they focus on data, and they've been able to monetize their data assets in a very big way. Now, our established companies, they're looking for and they need employees who can maintain their existing non-data based processes, right? So they're hiring differently, they're looking for different things. And typically developing data literacy is not a priority for them. and it's reflected in their workforce. Now, the third advantage is agility as a mindset. These younger companies, culturally, they've been focused on bringing products to market quickly, moving decision-making to the frontline managers, promoting innovative thinking, fostering competitive drive, and rapidly evaluating progress based on data. Now, established companies are trying to do this as well. We see this in just their desire to manage projects in an agile way. And so they're doing this, or they're trying to do this well on small teams, but they're typically struggling when they try to scale agility throughout the organization. And so you can start to see that just with these three examples, that the cultural differences between the internet companies and the established companies are pretty big. Now, in a similar way, high-performing organizations compared to their peers have some pretty big differences as it pertains to the data practices in their company. And let's look at a few statistics together on that. So McKinsey did some research to help us understand just how big these differences and the impacts of these data practices are. And so in this visual, the blue bars represent high-performing organizations who've had an organic growth rate of 10% or more the past 3 years, and the orange represents the rest of the respondents' organizations. Now, in the first metric on the left, it tells us that respondents at high-performing organizations are much more likely to report that they have a data leader in the C-suite. In fact, 70% more likely. In the next comparison, high-performing organizations are 65% more likely to make data and self-service tools accessible to frontline employees. They're also 70% more likely to create an organizational culture that supports rapid iteration based on data and one that tolerates fast failure. And they're 64% more likely to include data-related topics in their hiring criteria for non-management roles, and 60% more likely to include data-related topics in their hiring criteria for management roles. While it can sometimes be hard to distinguish the differences between high-performing organizations and others from the outside, it's research like this that helps us start to understand the nuances of how an organization's cultural approach to their work is impacting them. Established companies often feel like prisoners to what made them successful. Their static processes and hierarchical controls. Meanwhile, the new kids in class are faster, smarter, and better prepared to succeed in a data-driven environment. And as we just discussed, the culture of a company is of paramount importance to this topic. Companies that are content and comfortable with the way things have always been are going to struggle in this digital economy. On the flip side, companies who are willing to innovate and do things like change their org models or reward data-driven behavior to suit their strategic goals are going to have a much easier time adapting to the future. So let's take a pause for a moment, and I'd like to get to that survey that I mentioned. So Kelly, thanks for helping us out here. In just a second, I'm going to introduce 2 survey questions, and Zoom is going to put a pop-up window in front of you, and you'll be able to answer the question. You should know that the survey questions are completely anonymous, and I'll give you about 10 seconds to answer the question. So get ready, because this is going to go by pretty fast. Okay, so the first question. Now that we've talked about what data literacy is, you know more about it and why it's important. Have you ever heard anyone at your organization talk about or discuss the need for data literacy? So you have 10 seconds to answer the question. Go ahead and do that now. I'm curious to know if this topic's on the radar for organizations. Here at Sense Corp, we really believe that data literacy is a big deal for organizations because it can be a major factor in their long-term success. Okay, just a few more seconds left.
All right,
counting
we had
down.
just about everybody vote, so.
Perfect. Perfect. So I think Kelly's going to share those percentages with us. Oh, wow, fantastic. So we've had nearly 90% of you today say, yes, our organization is talking about this in some way, shape, or form. That's fantastic. And I think one of the reasons for that is just how much data is being created today, and how many young people are entering the workforce, and how we've got to be able to manage our data. So that's really, really interesting that the majority of folks on the call today are talking about it. And you registered for this webinar, so that makes sense as well of why you're here today. So let's go ahead and look at the second question. In terms of maturity, on a 1 to 5 scale, how would you rank your organization's enterprise-wide data literacy? You can go ahead and answer this. So you're probably going to put a 1 or a 2 if your organization's operating with a lot of legacy systems, workers are struggling with access to clean data, perhaps there's not much emphasis on the customer experience, and you're probably going to lean more towards the top of the scale if your organization is tracking every customer interaction and they're capable of utilizing that data for strategic purposes, and data is easily shared and consumed. All right, so we'll just count down here just a couple seconds. 3, 2, 1. We'll let Kelly share these percentages with us. All right, and we've kind of got a mix of folks here today. The great thing is that nobody's saying, hey, we're at the very, very bottom of this. The majority of you on the call today are saying, hey, we're probably in the reactive stage. And a couple of you have ranked yourselves very, very high in terms of how your organization's able to use data. So that's fantastic. Now, the good news is that however you've ranked yourself today, now if you're a 5, congratulations, really, congratulations, that's just amazing. But if you've ranked yourself lower, the good thing is that you're not stuck, right? This is just a point in time kind of assessment. Where are we doing, right? So with that, if you are interested in knowing how do we move up the maturity ladder, well, let's take a look at the 10 steps that we can do to foster a data literate workforce. So we're going to go into detail on these 10 steps in the coming slides. And we're sharing this today because while data literacy may sound somewhat straightforward, we find that companies seeking to create a data literate workforce, if it wasn't how they were founded, they often struggle with how to accomplish this because of their dependence on those legacy systems and the processes. And for these companies transitioning to a data literate environment, it's a daunting process that can require a lot of work. But these 10 steps, they're your roadmap to get you started. So let's dig into them together. Number 1, assess data literacy status. So where are you today? Now, whenever you assess something, that means that you have to have a way to measure it. In school, we had various subjects and we were graded on a scale from A+ down to an F. Now for data literacy, this is so new that we're literally creating the model and the standards to help people understand how to look at this topic and how to gauge themselves. Now we have 3 categories here: data pride, data platform, and data prowess. Data pride refers to how much the organization recognizes and values data. So going back to our school example for a second, think about your high school or your college pep rallies where school pride was on display for everyone to see. So how excited and pumped up is your organization about its data today? Is it something that excites the average employee? Or is it something that they're perhaps a bit embarrassed to talk about? Data platform refers to how much of the organization's data is easily accessible in a highly usable format. We hear the term data democratization being used more and more today. And that term refers to the ability for an organization to make data available to every employee, and that every data citizen, every employee has a right to use the organization's data in their work. I mean, of course, with the proper security protocols in place. If your organization has invested in an enterprise data warehouse or an even larger enterprise data platform over the years, then you've already made big strides in this area. The third category is data prowess. And this refers to how much the organization knows about working effectively with data. So if we're excited about our data and we have access to that data, do we know what to do with it next? Do we know how to truly turn it into an asset for our organization? And so we've included a lot of thoughtful questions on this slide, and these questions will really give you a great starting place for how to assess your organization's data literacy status when it's the right time for you to get started. But now in terms of assessing, remember I mentioned that Measurement is part of it. So we've taken these categories and we've plugged them into a matrix, which you're about to see. And that matrix looks at these categories through the lens of simply low, mid, or high. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. Now, this slide is full of text, but don't let that scare you because I'm going to make this real simple and walk through it. Now, the three categories we just looked at are the rows on this slide. You see them on the left, and we have low, mid, and high across the top. Now, when you're assessing data pride, if you agree with the statement that there's limited effort across your organization to capture or create high quality, automated, and standardized data, then you'd rank yourself as low. However, if that's not the case, and you find that there are pockets of initiatives focused on that, then you'd fall into the mid-level. And then the difference between the mid and the high is that once you're considered a high performer, then that means your organization is tackling this enterprise-wide and you have executive support for it. Now, when it comes to assessing data platform, if most of your data today is locked up in legacy or functional systems, if it's hard to get access to it or only certain people have access, then you'd rank yourself in the low category. Now, if you're looking at the mid or high levels, then your organization has likely made the investments to create an enterprise data warehouse or a platform, and most of the data is accessible through that platform in some way. And so you would just look at most or nearly all. Now, when it comes to data prowess, low is going to apply to these organizations that are still making a lot of instinct-driven decisions, relying on their gut. But at the mid and high levels, those decisions are either starting to be informed through the use of data or being highly informed through the use of data. So this matrix can be incredibly helpful to you as you assess where your organization is today with data literacy. Now, once you've completed the assessment, the next step is to develop a data literacy strategy. And I want to mention right from the start that a strategy is unique to each organization. It's based on the organization's status and needs. But the process for developing a strategy is similar no matter the organization. And that process includes the following. First, you want to distinguish where you are from where you want to be. So you'll baseline your assessment, and then you'll go through the brainstorming process to identify your goals, your future state, and you can really have fun with this. You can get a couple people together, you can use a virtual whiteboard if you can't meet in person, and you can have fun envisioning the future of your organization. Once you have that future vision, that future state in your minds, you can create an actionable plan for how to get there. And that becomes your roadmap and then your work plan, right? So what does your organization need to do to move from your current state to your desired future state? Third, we need to pay attention to the culture. So if this is a big shift, right? If you're in one of these established companies, then we need to recognize that and start laying the groundwork for the strategic value of data and the role that data literacy plays. Fourth, you'll gather the necessary resources, the right people with the right skills empowered in the right way. Use vendors and partners to your advantage. And an important note on this is to recognize that this is not an IT-driven project typically. Now, just because IT runs and manages the systems that create data, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're the right group to take care of the data. So if you have a data governance office or a data management office, it would make a lot of sense to put this effort under them. Otherwise, look for the business area or areas that will potentially have the greatest benefits from this effort initially and align it to them. And lastly, ensure that your plan is achievable and executable. Be a proponent of change. And here at Sense Corp, we like to say, do data daily. It's a mantra we use, and I'll share more on that at the end. Now, third, we've got to focus on securing that executive support. So similar to data governance or a major transformation effort, creating a culture that values data literacy is something that will require executive support. There needs to be someone in the C-suite that understands why data literacy matters to your organization and will champion its value. Along with that, sharing stories of the impact of data can be very helpful. If you're on a data literacy journey today, where you plan to be in the future, I recommend you watch these 4 TED Talks and consider sharing them with your organization, because sharing stories can be powerful in terms of solidifying that future vision and remembering why we got started on the journey in the first place. Now, the next step is to identify the data champions that you already have in your organization. For data literacy to work, you're going to need people that are data fluent and can help the rest of the organization get there. And here's how you might identify your data champions. First, these folks are confident, data fluent communicators. You might recognize them when they help reduce dependency on centralized teams, when new processes or technologies are being implemented, or they might serve as examples by helping other employees experiment with their data more confidently. You may find them serving in any area of your business today and in any role today. Now, some areas may be more likely to have them, but they can be found anywhere. They may often be your business analysts, your data stewards, or your architects who speak data naturally and effortlessly. They're usually very enthusiastic about data, and they're quick to evangelize its value. You may also be able to identify them in meetings based on the questions that they ask. So if you're in an organization that may not be very data literate today, these may be the voices that are constantly challenging you to have more data-led conversations by the questions that they ask. And instead of perhaps being a little annoyed by that, recognize how you can turn that into value in the future. And finally, these data champions are identifiable by the fact that not only do they ask questions, but they seek out answers of their own volition. They may join online communities, forums, or network events that promote data skills and encourage sharing. They're internal advocates for data. And as such, they should be empowered to better enable your company to become more data literate. The next step is to invest in a data literacy foundation. Now, this is not only an investment in technology, but in education as well. You might consider setting up a data university. And that data university may be powered by a technology platform, but there's more to think about. You'll need to educate the organization on data elements and data use. You'll emphasize the importance of reading, writing, and speaking data in a business setting. You'll allow employees to practice with data through apprenticeships. You'll create data certification milestones. Universities have graduation ceremonies when big milestones are reached. And our data universities should as well, because reaching those milestones will energize your workforce. And you'll need to communicate the availability of enterprise data assets. Now, I already mentioned that data volumes are growing exponentially. Young people are entering the workforce every year, and the need to understand what data is available and where it is and how to use it has never been more critical. Many companies today are also using data catalogs to help them in this area. Now, along with the data university, which may be the core of your data literacy foundation, you'll need to focus on the specific data literacy curriculum that applies to your organization. So as you're considering how to design that, think about the following. Build and practice data literacy concepts. So you'll need to educate the organization on the different types of data that you have, how to differentiate it, how to speak data in a business setting. You'll want to make the curriculum a mix of theoretical concepts and practical application. We know that people learn in different ways, and so we need to offer various learning styles to be able to reach everyone. Make it interesting. Incorporate games, incorporate storytelling. There are lots of gamification options available today, so take the opportunity to not only make it interesting, but make it fun as well. Create a tailored experience. So folks at every level in your organization may use this system, and you need to keep in mind what people at different levels need to learn, what they need to hear, and how they're most likely to be receptive to the information. You might also develop a mentoring program. Mentorship is so important. So we can teach people the facts and the how, but having a mentor or a coach that's going to help someone with the interpretation is absolutely invaluable. And finally, consider tying this coursework into career paths, performance reviews, and incentive structures. And this will ensure more widespread participation across the organization, and it will help make data literacy part of your culture, which is the ultimate goal. Now, once you have the data university going, you've figured out the curriculum, and you've started embedding it into the culture of your organization, then you'll be well positioned to tackle number 7, using data in decision making. And so here's a framework for how to get started with that. First, when you have a business decision that you need to make, try to convert it into a data question. What insights can you bring to the decision? Secondly, if you're going to bring in data, you really need to make sure that the data you're bringing in is from a trusted source. Where did it come from? Is it clean and of high quality? Third, consider the various analysis options available. You may be able to approach the problem from different angles. Fourth, once you've run your analysis and have come to a decision, communicate that decision clearly. Consider the type of communication necessary for your specific stakeholders, and please use storytelling if you can. As humans, we all respond more favorably when a storytelling approach is utilized well. And lastly, once the decision is made, track data points on that business decision and conduct a retrospective review. Do things end up the way you imagined they would have based on the data? And if not, why not, right? Was there something in the data we missed that we need to be sure to include in the future? We recognize that no decision is bulletproof, even those that leverage data. So commit to continuous learning of the process. Number 8, provide access to data. I like to say that data never sits still. It is always moving. And equipping an organization with standardized and trusted data requires some heavy lifting, often in the form of an enterprise data platform, a data warehouse being a key piece of that. Now, to ensure the data in an enterprise data platform is accurate, an organization is going to need to consider investing in data governance, data quality, master data management. And Sense Corp has an ebook called the Clean Data Initiative, and that resource can help you understand how these 3 disciplines are used to provide a foundation of clean data if that's something that your organization is struggling with. Additionally, organizations must provide access to data through easy-to-use reporting and analytics tools, while also investing in education, training users on available data sets, and helping them understand how to best use them. Number 9, hire data-savvy employees. So data-savvy employees are critical thinkers, and they ask questions differently. Hiring employees with these skills starts with HR typically, which should also be practicing data-savvy practices and including data requirements in the job profiles. Now, this requires a recruiting team that knows how to ask the right questions and understands how to contextualize a recruit's previous experience to understand their comfort level with data. For example, asking a simple question like, how have you used data in the past to make decisions, can reveal a lot about a candidate. And finally, we get to number 10. If you've done everything that's come before, then you need to continually support it by integrating data into daily activities. Daily activities are the obvious things: our meetings, our communications, and our reporting. We need to bring data into each of these activities, and by doing so, we will embed data into the DNA of our company and start making data the native language by which employees communicate effectively. And finally, to close the presentation today, I want to remind you of a mantra that we have here at Sense Corp, which is to do data daily. Data is the new language of business, and being data literate is going to make a big difference to each of your employees personally and to your organization collectively. The best way to become literate in any language or field of study is through immersion. It's important to practice the new and the old skills every day, and these 10 steps can help you on your journey. And so thank you so much for joining us today. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Kelly, and she's going to guide us through the Q&A and also let us know what's coming next. Kelly?
Great, thank you, Alyssa. That was excellent. So please feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A box. We do have a few here that we're going to go over, but feel free to keep typing them in. So first question, Alyssa, is my company is trying to do a lot with data, getting clean data, improving data. How does data literacy interact with these other priorities?
That's a fantastic question, because I think I'm going to take a wild guess here, but I'm guessing that if you're someone that's doing data at your company, that your organization always has data related projects going on, right? And there's always new milestones we're trying to reach and new things that we're trying to do with data. Now, data literacy is fantastic because the way that I think about it is I think about layering data literacy over the top of the data work that you're doing already, right? So it doesn't have to come in and disrupt anything that you're doing on your journey that you already know is of importance. But as you're executing these different projects, these different programs, start asking the question, is this project that we're doing that may be very technical in nature, maybe a reporting project, maybe an AI project, maybe we're improving some sort of data quality, is there something from a data literacy perspective that we should be thinking about or doing? And I think if organizations, if you start asking those sorts of questions, and they may be questions that you haven't asked before, maybe in exactly the same way, but if you start asking the questions, I think within a short amount of time, just a few months, you're going to see, hey, there might be something more here that we need to be doing. Maybe we need to go after that concept of a data university. Maybe we need to talk to HR about how we're hiring folks. So I would say, go ahead and keep on the track that you're on if it's working well for you. And start asking the questions about data literacy, and then let that naturally bubble up to where it becomes of priority and importance to your organization, and then kick it off from there.
Okay, great answer. Thank you. The last question we have for today is, can you list an example of where you might have seen a client pursue data literacy?
Yes, so I have a couple things that come to mind on that, and it's related to some big transformation projects that are going on. So we have an oil and gas client right now, and they're going through a massive transformation effort. They're moving to a cloud ERP system. They're redoing reporting. They've got lots and lots of change management going on, and so through that process, they're also looking at how can we make our organization more literate? How can we upskill our employees? And so one of the things that they've done is they've gone after this concept of a university, of wanting to provide modules of training and get people trained up and be able to track that. And then they're also doing some unique things, like they're making animated videos to help people understand what it is that they're going after. And so those are just two things that come to mind. And I'd love to see more organizations go after that sort of thing in the future so that they can really enable their workforce.
Okay, thank you. I did have a few other questions come in while you were answering that one, so let's go through those now since we have some extra time left. Alyssa, our organization is toward the lower end of the maturity scales you showcased earlier. We do not have a data warehouse or data lake in place today. Our data is stored natively in applications themselves. Any early recommendations on how we should start to get more data-centric, data literate?
Yep. So you're right. If that's kind of the case, then you are definitely, kind of sitting in that level 1, level 2 area on the maturity curve. As you think about data literacy, so think about it in 2 ways. One, if your organization for some reason can't go down a path where they can invest in a major enterprise data platform, right? Or maybe that's just not something that's going to get traction right now. Maybe it's coming in the future. In the meantime, you can still do a lot of work to help the organization understand what data is available in what places today, right? It may not be ideal, but you can start educating people. Conversely, if your company or your organization is saying, hey, we're thinking of really overhauling everything that we're doing with data, we're thinking about this big enterprise data platform, then that's really, you're going to basically end up on the equivalent of a transformation journey, right? That has some very specific goals that you're trying to reach. And if that's where you're headed, then you simply need to make data literacy part of that project or that program. So if you're saying, hey, we're going to create a data lake, we're going to create a data warehouse, fantastic. So how are we going to let people know about it? How are we going to educate them on what's in that, right? And so you might think of data literacy very similar to organizational change management. They partner together very, very well. But it's a slightly different lens because you're saying, how do we ensure that data literacy is a skill that our people have and that we foster it and nurture it?
Great. Okay, and last question here. How much data resides outside of an ERP in data literate companies?
So it can be quite a lot. I have worked with companies that, they may have a main ERP system, but then they'll have all sorts of other systems for other purposes. Most companies today have Salesforce. They have some sort of marketing software, maybe a Marketo or a Pardot. They may have transportation systems. It's not uncommon to look at an organization's enterprise architecture and say, okay, we've got an ERP, and you also have 25 other systems doing something, right? And maybe data from that ERP is going to the other systems, or the other systems are feeding data into the ERP. And so it starts to be kind of this puzzle that for some companies, if they don't kind of have it figured out already, that you've got to go in and you've got to start to unravel, what data is being created where. What is the source of that data? Where is that data traveling? What systems can update that data? What systems are allowed to delete that data or archive that data? Does it go into a reporting platform? And now you've got reporting tools, you've got AI tools possibly in the mix. And so your data can be everywhere, right? And so you've really got to get a handle on what data is in what place for what purpose. And when people need to do something with data, where is the authoritative place that they can go in the organization that they know when they use that data set, that data is going to be clean and of high quality. And eventually the goal would be to have certified data that they know when they use it, they're using the best data that they have. So, but if you're in that place where you have an ERP system and then many other systems today, you've really got to get clarity on what data are we keeping where, for what purpose. And then the data literacy component comes in and says, okay, let me help the rest of the organization understand what data to use and when. We're also seeing tools in the marketplace that literally they're calling themselves a data marketplace tool. And so these tools literally allow data sets to be published and the organization to go to that internal data marketplace and say, okay, that's the data set I want, and they can request it, and then the tool can apply the security, track the fact that they have the request, and it makes data something that can be shared, just like we share documents in SharePoint today, right? It's shareable, it's trackable, and it's easy to find. We're just, as a nation, as humans in this world, this is just a young practice area for us, right? This is data is basically like the Model T was back in the 1920s and 30s, right? We have data, we know what it can do, it's very powerful, but we don't have all the bells and whistles figured out yet. And so it's actually a very exciting time to be alive, because those of us today that are on this call that are listening in, we're the ones that are going to determine how the market changes, how it shifts. And ultimately, like if you think about your kids and your grandkids someday working at companies and working with data, the capabilities that they will have available to them are going to be very, very cool. So I hope that encourages everyone today to, even if you're maybe low on the maturity curve, just recognize that this is a process, it's a journey, we're on the journey together, and I would just encourage you to just keep going after clean data, data literacy, and I promise that you're going to see success with that. Thank you everyone for joining today. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thanks for the engagement, the great questions. Alyssa, thank you for your time. I wanted to just remind everybody that you will be receiving a message from us with the recording, the slides, and the link to the ebook that you see on the screen here today. If you are watching this webinar as a recording, or if you are on the call and you have any additional questions that didn't get answered, please feel free to go ahead and reach out. You can email us at marketing@sensecorp.com. Again, thanks for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.